The story of Ilara Vance and the man who washed up on the edge of her world began, as most tragedies do, with a silence. It had been a year since her husband Liam's laughter had been stolen by the unforgiving prairie soil, leaving behind a quiet so profound it felt like a physical weight. Her world had shrunk to the boundaries of their struggling ranch, a bubble of grief inhabited only by her, her two small children, and the ghosts of 1,000 happier memories. The townsfolk whispered about her, the poor widow on the hill, but their pity was a distant hum. A more immediate rumor had captured their attention, a wild man, seen lurking in the cottonwood grove that bordered her property. They called him dangerous, a feral beast. They described him with a casual cruelty, remarking on his hulking size, his unkempt beard, and, as one shopkeeper had put it, his frame being too chubby for a man living off the land, a detail meant to make him sound both pathetic and grotesque. But when Ilara finally saw him, huddled by the creek bed during a sudden downpour, all she saw was a man shivering with a cold that had nothing to do with the rain. His eyes, when they met hers, held not wildness, but a vast, empty loneliness she recognized as a mirror to her own. Ignoring the frantic pulse of fear in her throat, she left a blanket and a thermos of soup on a stump near the grove. He was gone the next morning, but the thermos was left clean and neatly placed beside the blanket, folded with a precision that spoke not of a beast, but of a man with a past. She began leaving food for him daily, and eventually, he grew bold enough to take shelter in their old, unused barn, a silent, watchful presence who did no harm. He was a mystery, a man without a name or a voice, and for now, that was enough. The town could have its monster, she would have her quiet guardian. For weeks, he remained a ghost in her periphery. She would see him from the kitchen window, his large frame surprisingly deft as he mended a section of collapsed fence or cleared fallen branches from the path to the creek. Her son, Leo, and daughter, Maya, watched him with a mixture of fear and fascination. They called him John, a name as simple and anonymous as he was. He never spoke a word, communicating only through his work and the profound gentleness he showed her animals. He moved with a heavy grace, his size a testament to a strength he kept carefully leashed. Ilara found herself depending on his silent presence, the rhythmic sound of his axe-splitting firewood a comfort against the oppressive quiet Liam had left behind. One afternoon, while wrestling with a stubborn jar of pickled peaches in the kitchen, her frustration mounted into a wave of grief. The jar slipped, shattering on the floor in a sticky, glittering mess. A sob escaped her, sharp and raw. She sank to her knees, the shards of glass a perfect metaphor for her life. And then, a shadow fell over the doorway. It was John. He stood there for a moment, his expression unreadable, before stepping carefully inside. He took a broom from the wall and began sweeping up the mess, his movements methodical and calm. When he was done, he knelt before her, his large hands hovering uncertainly in the air. Ilara looked up, tears blurring her vision, her heart aching with the familiar pain of doing everything alone. He looked into her eyes, and for the first time, he spoke. His voice was a low, rusty rumble, as if it hadn't been used in years. "You're my storm and my harbor," he said. Ilara froze. The world tilted on its axis, every sound in the universe screeching to a halt. The air left her lungs in a whoosh. It was Liam's phrase. A secret, whispered promise he had murmured to her 1,000 times, in the dark of night, in the joy of their wedding, in the final, fading moments of his life. It was a sentence no one else on earth could possibly know. The impossible words hung in the air between them, shimmering with the ghost of her husband's love. Ilara's mind raced, trying to find a logical explanation where none existed. Had she spoken the words aloud in her grief? Had one of the children repeated something they'd overheard? But she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was a phrase reserved for the most intimate moments, a sacred text of their marriage. John, this silent, nameless man, had spoken it with the same gentle reverence as Liam. He seemed to see the shock and terror on her face, for he flinched back, his own eyes wide with a confusion that matched hers. He retreated from the house without another word, leaving Ilara kneeling on the floor, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. In the days that followed, an invisible thread of tension and wonder stretched between the cabin and the barn. She watched him more closely, searching for other signs, other fragments of her lost husband. And they came. He began humming a little tune while he worked, a simple, nameless melody Liam used to whistle while he tinkered in his workshop. Then, one evening, he found 6-year-old Maya crying on the porch swing over her broken doll. The next morning, a small, exquisitely carved wooden sparrow sat on the porch rail where the doll had been. It was identical to the ones Liam used to carve for the children, down to the tiny, intricate feathers etched into the wood. The sight of it made Ilara's knees go weak. This was more than coincidence, it was a miracle, or a haunting. She felt as if she were living with two men at once, the lost stranger in the barn, and the spirit of her husband, somehow breathing through him. The dead garden behind the house, a patch of earth she hadn't had the heart to touch since Liam's passing, became their silent meeting ground. She went out one morning to find him turning the soil, his powerful shoulders working rhythmically. Without a word, she picked up a spade and began to work alongside him, their shared labor a conversation deeper than any words. In that shared silence, a fragile seed of hope began to take root in the barren soil of her heart. The first sign of a different kind of storm appeared not in the sky, but in her mailbox. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope bearing the logo of the Sterling Development Corporation. The letter inside was polite but firm, a clinical offer to buy her land for a fraction of its worth. It spoke of regional consolidation and progress, but the words dripped with predatory intent. It ended with a thinly veiled warning about the difficulties of maintaining a property like hers alone. The letter felt like a violation, an invasion of the fragile peace she was starting to rebuild. That evening, as black clouds gathered on the horizon, mirroring the turmoil in her soul, she stood on the porch, the letter trembling in her hand. John emerged from the barn and came to stand beside her, his presence a solid, reassuring weight. He didn't look at her, but stared out at the approaching storm, his jaw set. He had seen the envelope in her hand, had felt the shift in her demeanor. He seemed to understand the nature of the threat without having read a single word. The wind picked up, whipping her hair across her face, and the first fat drops of rain began to fall. Lightning cracked across the sky, momentarily illuminating his face. In that flash, she saw an expression that wasn't confusion or gentleness, but a cold, hard fury. It was the look of a protector, of a man who understood that their sanctuary, this small pocket of the world they had begun to share, was under siege. He hadn't spoken since that day in the kitchen, but as the storm broke over the house, his silence was more powerful than any declaration. He was standing guard not just over a piece of land, but over her, over the children, over the delicate new beginning they were tending to like the nascent sprouts in their garden. The corporate monster was faceless and distant, but in that moment, Ilara knew she was no longer facing it alone. A few days later, a sleek black car, so out of place it looked like a scar on the dusty landscape, crunched up her driveway. A man in an impeccably tailored suit stepped out, his polished shoes sinking slightly into the dirt. He was all sharp angles and predatory smiles. He introduced himself as Mr. Thorne, from Sterling Development. He didn't wait for an invitation, striding onto her porch as if he owned it, his gaze sweeping over the homestead with dismissive appraisal. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice smooth as oil, "I trust you received our generous offer. We find it's often better to discuss these things face to face. A woman like you, all alone out here." It's a heavy burden. His condescension was a physical force, pressing down on her. Before she could form a reply, the barn door creaked open. John stepped into the sunlight, his large frame filling the space. He wiped his hands on a rag, his eyes fixed on Thorne. A strange thing happened. Thorne's slick smile faltered. A flicker of something, recognition, shock, maybe even fear, crossed his features before he masked it. He stared at John for a beat too long, his composure visibly cracking. "Who is this?" Thorne demanded, his voice suddenly sharp. Ilara found her own. "He helps me around the property." John took a slow step forward, then another. He stopped beside Ilara, a silent wall between her and the intruder. Thorne took an involuntary step back, his bravado evaporating. "We'll be in touch," he snapped, turning on his heel and retreating to his car, casting one last, unnerved glance at John before speeding away in a cloud of dust. The confrontation left Ilara trembling, not with fear, but with a surge of adrenaline. She looked up at John, whose gaze was still fixed on the disappearing car. His brow was furrowed in pained concentration, as if he were trying to grasp a memory that was just out of reach. He turned to her, his eyes dark with a protective fire. "No one," he said, his voice a low, resolute promise, "will ever take this from you." It was another echo, another of Liam's vows, but this time, it felt different. It was spoken with a new weight, a new authority. This was not a memory. It was a declaration of war. The confrontation with Thorn acted like a key in a rusty lock. That night, John was restless, pacing the length of the barn. Elara, watching from her window, saw him clutch his head as if in agony. The next morning, she found him by the creek, staring into the water, his face pale and strained. He was agitated, scratching frantic, complex symbols into the damp earth with a stick. They weren't random doodles, they were precise, intricate diagrams. Elara knelt beside him, her heart pounding. She recognized the shapes. They were chemical formulas, engineering schematics. They looked like blueprints for some kind of industrial process. "What is this?" she whispered, touching his arm. He flinched, his eyes wild with fragmented images. "Fire," he rasped, his voice raw. "An explosion. Metal." Screaming, he looked at her, his usual confusion now sharpened with a terrifying clarity. "My name. I think my name is Adam." The name felt solid, real. It was the first piece of his own past, not Liam's. He was not just John, the ghost who spoke with her husband's voice. He was Adam, a man with a history so violent it had shattered his mind. Together, they returned to the cabin, the barrier between them dissolved by his terrifying breakthrough. He talked for hours, his speech broken and halting, describing flashes of memory, a laboratory, the hum of powerful machinery, the acrid smell of chemicals, the face of Mr. Thorne, not smiling, but snarling. He remembered holding documents, feeling a righteous anger, a sense of betrayal. He remembered the blinding flash of an explosion, the searing heat, and then nothing. Just a vast, quiet emptiness until he woke up in the woods near her home, his identity erased, his soul scoured clean, leaving a vessel empty enough to be filled with the echoes of another good man's love. He was a man who had tried to do the right thing and had paid for it with his entire world. Elara listened, her fear for him warring with a fierce, soaring pride. The mystery of his connection to Liam remained, a supernatural enigma, but the mystery of the man himself was beginning to unravel, revealing not a drifter, but a hero. Driven by a desperate need for answers, Elara spent the next day scouring the internet, using the few clues Adam had given her: Sterling Development, a lab, an explosion, and his new name. The pieces finally clicked into place with a sickening thud. She found an archived news article from a year and a half prior. The headline read, "Whistleblower Missing, Presumed Dead." After exposing corporate malfeasance, the whistleblower was Dr. Adam Hayes, a brilliant chemical engineer who had uncovered proof that a subsidiary of Sterling Development was illegally dumping toxic waste, poisoning the water table for miles. The article detailed his attempts to bring the information to the authorities, and the campaign of intimidation he faced. Then, a car bomb had detonated outside his remote research facility. Adam was declared dead at the scene, though his body was never fully recovered from the inferno. The man named as Sterling's chief fixer, a ruthless operative known for making problems disappear, was Silas Black. Mr. Thorne was quoted in the article, offering Sterling's deepest sympathies and denying any corporate wrongdoing. Elara stared at the pixelated photograph of Dr. Adam Hayes. It was him. Thinner, clean-shaven, with a confident, intelligent light in his eyes, but it was undeniably the man in her barn. He had survived the unsurvivable, the blast wiping his memory but not his life. He had wandered for months, a man without a past, drawn by some inexplicable force to this small patch of land, to her. The supernatural connection suddenly made a different kind of sense. Perhaps it wasn't a haunting. Perhaps the land itself, saturated with Liam's love and fierce desire to protect his family, had called out to another protector, another good man in desperate need of a safe harbor. It had offered him a refuge and, in return, filled his empty spaces with the echoes of the love that defined the place. Adam wasn't possessed by Liam, he was being guided by his spirit, his lover compass leading Adam home. That night, the fragile peace shattered for good. A storm of a different kind descended, one of human malice. The power to the house suddenly cut out, plunging them into an unnerving darkness broken only by the sliver of a moon. Ilara's heart leaped into her throat. Through the window, she saw two silhouettes moving with stealthy purpose towards the barn. Thorn. And with him, a taller, leaner figure who moved with the predatory grace of a wolf. Silas. They had come back to finish the job. Get the children. Adam's voice was low and urgent, devoid of any confusion. He was no longer the lost man, he was the protector, fully present. Go to the root cellar. Bar the door. Do not come out. He grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace, his knuckles white. The fight was no longer about land, it was about survival. Ilara herded a sleepy Leo and a whimpering Maya down the creaking steps to the cellar, her mind a whirlwind of terror. She bolted the heavy door, listening to the muffled sounds from above. A crash of glass. A man's shout, filled with surprise and pain. The sickening thud of a body hitting the floor. The fight had begun. She huddled with her children in the damp, earthy dark, praying to a God she hadn't spoken to in a year. She prayed for the gentle stranger who had mended her fences and her heart. She prayed for Dr. Adam Hayes, the man who had lost everything for doing what was right. She prayed for the impossible guardian Liam's love had seemingly sent her. Outside the cellar door, the sounds of a desperate battle raged, the sanctuary of her home transformed into a war zone. Every crash, every shout, every strained grunt was a blow against her own soul. This was the final, violent crucible. Either they would emerge from this night broken and defeated, or they would forge a new future from the wreckage, baptized in fire and fury. The sounds of the fight moved from the house to the yard, a brutal, swirling melee under the cold moonlight. Peeking through a crack in the cellar door, Ilara saw Adam, a primal force of fury, using the familiar landscape as a weapon. He was not a trained fighter, but he was driven by something more powerful than training, the absolute, desperate need to protect the family he had found. He used a length of fence post to disarm Silas, whose knife skittered across the dirt. Thorn, cowardly and enraged, tried to flank him, but Ilara, unable to remain a spectator, burst from the cellar. She grabbed a heavy cast-iron skillet from the porch, a humble domestic tool-turned weapon, and swung it with all her might against the back of Thorn's knees, sending him sprawling. The fight culminated in the barn, the cavernous space filled with grunts and the splintering of wood. Silas, recovering his nerve, cornered Adam near a stack of hay bales. He was bigger, faster, a professional killer. But as he lunged, Adam's eyes fell on the workbench where the small, carved sparrow he had made for Maya still Saturday. It was a symbol of everything he was fighting for: innocence, kindness, a new life. A surge of adrenaline, of pure, unadulterated purpose, coursed through him. He sidestepped the lunge, using Silas's momentum to send him crashing into a support beam. The beam, weakened from years of neglect, groaned and then cracked, a section of the hayloft collapsing down on Silas, trapping him beneath a mountain of hay and splintered timber. Thorn, seeing his enforcer neutralized, made a final, desperate move for a fallen shotgun. But Ilara was there first, kicking it away. Adam stood over the sputtering, defeated corporate man, his chest heaving. The violence was over. In the sudden, ringing silence, they stood together amidst the wreckage, battered and bruised, but unbroken. They had defended their home. They had won. In the aftermath, the flashing lights of sheriff's cars painted the pre-dawn sky in strobes of red and blue. Thorn and a groaning Silas were taken into custody, their identities and Adam's story quickly corroborating the tale of a corporate hit gone wrong. The sterling development empire began to crumble under the weight of a reopened investigation. The threat was gone, vanquished not by lawyers or courts, but by the raw courage of two people defending their sanctuary. Adam's identity as Dr. Adam Hayes was confirmed, but his memories remained fragmented, a shattered mosaic he had no desire to piece back together. The man he was now was the only man he wanted to be. He chose to stay. The world saw him as a hero, but in the quiet moments on the ranch, he was just Adam, the man who hummed Liam's tunes and fixed the water pump. A few months later, the world had healed. The garden, once a symbol of death and neglect, was bursting with life, its vibrant colors a testament to their shared work. The barn was repaired, stronger than before. One sunny afternoon, Ilara sat on the porch swing, watching Adam play with Leo and Maya in the yard. He was teaching Leo how to skip stones across the creek, his deep laughter echoing in the air, a sound that was now entirely his own, yet filled the silence just as beautifully as Liam's once had. Maya ran up to the porch, giggling. "Adam says I'm his little storm," she squealed with delight, before running back to the game. Ilara smiled, a true, deep smile that reached her eyes. Later, as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Adam came to sit beside her on the swing. He took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles in a familiar, comforting gesture. He was quiet for a long time, watching the children, watching the land. Then he turned to her, his eyes full of a love that was new and profound and entirely his. "You know," he said, his voice soft, "you're my storm and my harbor." The words no longer felt like an echo from the past. They were a promise for the future, spoken by the man she loved, here and now. Liam had given her a life of beautiful memories, but Adam, the miracle sent by a ghost's love, was giving her a life to live.